The graceful Victorian scrollwork of this 1869 Grover & Baker gives it a quiet elegance few sewing machines can match. But it's not only its undeniable beauty that makes this machine special. Hidden under its bed is a truly unique mechanism that produces the most complicated and unusual stitch ever created, the double chain. Let's get her off this display base and onto a hand crank base to show what makes these machines so extraordinary. Starting in the rear, we have a spring-loaded spool brake that not only stops the spool from working its way off its holder, but also prevents it from over-rotating and spewing loose thread around when jerked by the sewing arm. When I got this machine, the entire upper tensioning unit was missing. This replacement had to be made. The only pictures I could find at the time showed an hourglass-shaped tensioning adjustment nut, so that's what I made. Afterward, Mike at Wolfgang's Collectibles explained that this style was mostly used on earlier machines. Later models, like mine, used planer nuts like this. The machine is usually displayed with this nut because it makes it look more interesting, but on those days I feel compelled to be more historically accurate, I use the smaller nut. Next, we come to two features that anyone wanting to repair one of these machines will find important. The first is that unlike most of the pivot cones I've come across, these are not threaded. They simply push in and out and are secured by two set screws under the bed. The problem is that on older machines, these can become so stuck that the unsuspecting may assume they may indeed be screw type and waste a lot of time trying to unscrew them. More important is how this stationary arm mounts to the base. It's tempting to assume that undoing the two screws under the bed will release it. It's also tempting to assume that when the arm doesn't come off, that congealed oil and rust has locked it to the base. The first impulse would be to use a hammer and chisel to break it loose. Doing so could shatter the arm. In addition to the two screws, the arm is held in place by two large tight-fitting pins. Chiseling under just one end of the arm could easily break the arm in half. The safe way to release it is to use a chisel with a very small blade angle and slowly work the arm straight up by alternating between the front and the rear, back and forth, raising each by only a small amount until the arm is loose. Another interesting feature is this thread tensioning unit, which keeps the thread snug so it doesn't get tangled when sewing. This thread guide is particularly interesting because it's more than just a thread guide, but we need to move in closer to see why. It consists of two thin metal leaves. Twice during each stitch, the outer leaf gets pushed backward, releasing the thread, allowing it to be pulled downward by the lower needle. Although the finish was worn away down to the bare metal over most of the machine, and the metal covered with rust, the design of the original artwork could be seen in the various patterns of the rust. Also, a few flakes of the original enamels remained on the center design, allowing it to be recreated. The result seen here is nearly 100% accurate to what was originally on the machine 150 years ago. Here's a better view of what it looks like. This is the presser foot lifter, and this is the stitch length adjuster. This is the reciprocating circular needle that creates the Grover & Baker's unique double chain stitch. In a normal chain stitcher, a rotating hook grabs and holds onto a loop of thread until the needle comes down a second time, creating a second loop that captures the first one. In the Grover & Baker, this circular needle not only does that, but creates its own secondary loops, which in turn are captured by subsequent loops. This creates a double chain stitch that offers more stretch than either lock stitches or regular chain stitches. Let's see how it looks. To thread a Grover & Baker, slide the upper thread spool onto its holder so that the thread comes off of the bottom in front of the spool so it doesn't get tangled up in the spool brake. Bring it up, over and through the tensioning discs, over and through the slot in the spring-loaded tensioner, down through the thread guide, and finally through the needle from front to back. Install the lower spool in the same way, then using tweezers, carry the thread through the 3 guides in the circular needle, starting from the rear. Here's one. There's a second one halfway around the needle. And finally one in the very point. Then use tweezers to bring the thread up through the needle hole and pull it back along with the upper thread. The circular needle may be difficult to thread, but that doesn't stop these machines from being a lot of fun to sew on. Here's a close-up of what the top stitch looks like, and the bottom stitch, the famous double chain stitch. I sincerely hope you enjoyed this video about our Grover & Baker, which is now the pride of our collection. Thanks for watching.